On the night of September 28th, silence over Western Russia was broken by a sudden burst of fire. In Belgorod, a towering blaze lit the sky before the city vanished into complete darkness. Streets froze without lights, elevators stopped mid-floor, and families stared out of their windows into a void. For 500,000 people, it felt as if modern life had been unplugged in an instant. The shock was not only the absence of power, but the realization that something far greater had been struck. What unfolded that night was more than a military exchange. It was the beginning of a story that reaches deep into civilian life, military strength, and the fragile contract between people and state. On the night of September 28th, Ukraine launched an attack of unusual size and daring. Instead of merely probing the front lines, they sent waves of unmanned aerial vehicles, guided bombs, and long-range rockets deep into Russian territory. Many analysts suggest the strike involved HIMARS, or variants of that system targeting a key energy hub in the Belgorod region. This was no random shelling. It was a calculated move to hit the core of Russian infrastructure. Reports from the Kyiv Independent affirm that Ukrainian HIMARS rockets struck a thermal power plant near Belgorod, triggering widespread power outages. The campaign behind this strike was carefully orchestrated. Ukraine has gradually shifted from defense to counter-offensive tactics, stretching the war beyond the usual battle lines. By aiming at Russia's infrastructure, what Putin and his regime call the backbone of national stability, Ukraine turned the war inward. The night's assault was framed not as retaliation, but as a demonstration of reach. The ability to strike deep, disrupt supply lines, and force the Russian state to respond at home. In total, 8 distinct zones across Russia were struck nearly simultaneously. This coordination gave the impression of a symphony of fire, every explosion a note, every blackout a pause in the melody. The UAF likely dispatched UAV swarms in multiple sectors to overload Russian air defenses. While ground defenses tracked decoys, the real payloads found less resistance. The multiple front pattern created confusion, forcing Russia to split its response. In some segments, anti-air systems were drawn north, in others to the east, leaving gaps that the real missiles could exploit. Belgorod's selection was strategic. It lies just across the Ukrainian border and has become an essential node in Russia's logistics and power network. The region is used to funnel supplies, ammunition, and fuel to the south and east fronts. If Belgorod's infrastructure is disabled, entire supply chains slow down or halt entirely. In that sense, it was never a safe target, but the boldness lies in using precision arms to strike it. The night attack exposed how vulnerable even heavily defended rear areas might be under a coordinated campaign. Satellite data and open-source intelligence strengthen the case that the strike was not blind. Analysts believe Ukraine timed the assault to coincide with maximum pressure on Russian air defenses, when some batteries would be worn or repositioned. The swarm of UAVs acted as both scouts and distractions, forcing radar and missile systems to split focus. Once certain sectors were occupied, HIMARS rockets known for their accuracy were launched to hit the power plant and its substation network. Contemporary reporting suggests the resulting blackout was complete across Belgorod and its surroundings. Importantly, this attack was not purely destructive. It carried a symbolic weight to show Russians that Kyiv could reach them, even in areas once considered protected. It undercut the Kremlin's narrative of safe rear zones. Every siren, every explosion, every blackout fed a psychological campaign. And in the coming hours and days, citizens would see the consequences: systems down, infrastructure crippled, routine life interrupted. This shift in targeting doctrine marks a new phase. Ukraine has moved beyond cross-border skirmishes into systematic hits on critical infrastructure. The night of September 28th was not just about explosions, it was about signaling capability and intent. Belgorod's blackout was a warning. No place is untouchable. In the next part, We will follow what happened after the rockets struck, how whole neighborhoods plunged into chaos, and how that blackout exposed cracks in Russia's control over its own people. When the missiles struck the Belgorod power plant, the night sky transformed into chaos. A massive flash of flame lit the horizon, then darkness swallowed whole neighborhoods. Smoke curled upward as electricity blinked out across the city. Residents reported at least 4 loud explosions followed by immediate blackouts in Belgorod and adjacent towns. In the moments after impact, videos from citizens began circulating on social media. One clip shows a shopping mall interior washed in sudden blackness. Another captures intersections where traffic lights once glowing now stand dead. A person stuck in an elevator films the ceiling lights going off mid-ride. These visuals underscored how swiftly the attack unraveled everyday order. Losing power was more than an inconvenience, it severed the invisible threads that keep modern life running. Water pumps stopped, taps ran dry. Internet routers went dark, cutting off social media, messaging, and voice calls. For roughly 500,000 residents, communication died overnight. Local authorities admitted that key networks went offline, leaving people isolated not only from each other, but also from official instructions. Critical facilities felt the strain almost instantly. Hospitals switched to backup generators, but those lacked the capacity to run all systems. Some medical devices shut down, forcing staff to prioritize life-critical care. In stores, lights failed mid-transaction. Queues snaked through aisles as people scrambled for essentials. At petrol stations, pumps ceased functions. Customers resorted to paying in cash where possible, as digital payments risked failing altogether. These scenes were not just disruptions, they were the emotional fulcrum of the assault. For the first time, ordinary Russians felt the war breach their homes, their streets, their routines. Shock, confusion, panic. These were no longer words and propaganda, but lived experiences. As power flickered out, the psychological boundary between war zone and home zone collapsed. In the coming hours, emergency services struggled to restore order. Authorities scrambled to mobilize repair crews under blackout conditions. Telegram and local messaging groups became hotbeds of unverified rumors, intensifying fear among residents. The blackout became a crucible for instability, threatening to overwhelm the state's control over its own people. As the hours passed, the blackout grew heavier. Families lit candles in their kitchens while trying to save food spoiling in powerless refrigerators. Parents calmed children, frightened by the sudden silence of a city where even streetcars had stopped. Without mobile networks, many could not call relatives to check if they were safe. The absence of information created its own kind of fear, spreading faster than the fire at the plant itself. Shops quickly became flashpoints of tension. People rushed to buy bottled water and bread, knowing supply trucks might not arrive for days. Cashiers demanded cash only, because card readers were useless. Long lines stretched onto sidewalks, and arguments broke out as shelves emptied. Petrol stations faced even worse scenes. With pumps shut down, drivers fought over limited generator-powered dispensers, each desperate to secure fuel before reserves disappeared. In hospitals, the dim light of emergency generators revealed the fragility of care. Surgeries were postponed, and dialysis patients were told to wait. Even a few hours of delay risked lives. These details painted a picture that no propaganda could cover. For 500,000 people, war was no longer an image on television, but the cold reality outside their front doors. Having seen how Belgorod's residents were plunged into chaos, the next part will explore how regional officials and the Kremlin responded, what they admitted, what they concealed, and how the political narrative began to shift. From the moment the blackout spread, regional leadership could not stay silent. By early morning on September 29th, Vyacheslav Gladkov, the governor of Belgorod Oblast, publicly confirmed that critical energy infrastructure had been struck and large parts of the region were without power. He noted that repair crews were mobilized and alternative supply lines were being activated. Notably, Gladkov did not stop at admitting outages. He delivered a stinging warning. Systems used to detect incoming missiles or UAVs in the region might also be compromised. In his remarks, he admitted that disruptions to those defense sensors posed a risk to civilians. This was an extraordinary statement akin to a regional official saying that the protective shield itself was fracturing. Meanwhile, state-run media and Moscow's official channels attempted to spin the event as a technical malfunction or infrastructure glitch. Russian outlets described the blackout as an internal system failure, not as a result of enemy fire. However, these attempts were short-lived. Within hours, videos from the night showing explosions and widespread darkness circulated online, while satellite imagery confirmed a massive fire at the energy site. Independent analysts and observers quickly ruled out any spontaneous failure narrative. The discrepancy between the official narrative and on-the-ground evidence carried heavy weight. For Moscow, this was a political loss. The Kremlin had long claimed that rear zones were secure and that civilians would never see war's full impact on their doorsteps. Gladkov's admission marked the first time a regional leader had acknowledged that the state failed to shield its own territory. That crack in the narrative sent ripples through the public psyche. The war, until then portrayed as a distant struggle, had now invaded bedrooms, neighborhoods, and city blocks. Many Russians who had accepted monthly blackouts or disruptions in war-affected areas now faced fear that their government could not protect even their homes. The psychological contract between the Kremlin and its people's stability in exchange for obedience began to erode that night. In the coming hours, local administrators and propagandists scrambled to regain control of the narrative. They attempted to delay full admission, restrict footage, and delay official statements, but the momentum of evidence was against them. The power outage became not just an engineering flaw, but a political liability for Moscow. With official reactions failing to salvage credibility, the stage was set for Ukraine to press its advantage on the battlefield. In the next part, we will examine how the strike's military impact reverberated across command networks, logistics chains, and frontline units. Belgorod was never just a civilian hub, it stood as a vital military rear base. By supplying power to radar, airfields, and command centers, it acted like the brain behind Russia's defenses. When those systems faltered, the consequences rippled outward. In that blackout, radar arrays tied to S-300 and S-400 batteries lost stable power, forcing crews to rely on backup systems with limited capability. Command posts, meant to coordinate air defense and frontline operations, saw gaps in real-time data. At the same time, Belgorod's airfields lost runway lighting, hampering sorties or rapid redeployment of aircraft to respond. But perhaps the most direct blow was to the logistic arteries, the rail network. Belgorod lies along rail lines linking Russia's industrial interior to Donbass and Crimea. As power controls failed, signal systems and switching stations shut down, halting trains in their tracks. One vivid image from analysts described a military convoy of T-90M tanks and BMP-3 vehicles stranded because tracks entered a digital blackout. Locomotives could not receive the next signal. The halted trains became immovable iron shells, turning a key supply chain into a dead zone. This tactic resembles what strategists call logistics strangulation. In essence, by disabling a single hub, an attacker can throttle the flow of fuel, munitions, and personnel across a vast network. The Belgorod strike was engineered along those lines. Remove a central node, and the entire net weakens. Due to the power outage, factories in Belgorod and adjacent areas that retrofitted military production lines slowed or stopped. Presses forming shell casings, welders assembling armor, and robotics welding vehicle parts all depend on steady electricity. With power gone, even with backup generators, capacity shrank sharply. Primes and sub-suppliers found their throughput slashed. This cascading effect hit Russia's ability to replenish frontline materiel. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, have long warned that Russian supply lines depend heavily on a few critical rail hubs, making them vulnerable to disruption if targeted in depth, ISW. Belgorod's outage proved that theory in practice. Without signaling, armored trains and fuel convoys became liabilities rather than assets. The ripple spread across operations in Donbass, where delays in resupply increased pressure on already stretched Russian units. At the same time, the strike eroded confidence in doctrine. Russian planning has always relied on pushing the front far from its own borders, keeping rear areas secure. Belgorod's sudden paralysis challenged that belief, showing that modern precision weapons erase the line between front and rear. This realization carries long-term consequences for troop morale, defense planning, and Russia's ability to project strength. Putting it together, the strike delivered a dual blow: marring vision, blinding defense systems, and paralyzing legs, crippling logistics and movement. Ukrainian forces did not merely aim to injure. They sought to make Belgorod a strategic liability for Moscow. With military infrastructure disrupted and logistics collapsing, the war's balance began tilting. Next, we will examine how this strategic disruption reshapes the political battleground, how the Kremlin's narrative may unravel under sustained pressure. The blackout in Belgorod did more than cut power. It cut into the core promise that has held Russia's politics together for 2 decades: the trade of obedience for stability. From the night of September 28th into the morning of September 29th, Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov publicly confirmed strikes on critical energy assets and acknowledged wide outages, which signaled that the state could not fully shield its own rear areas. The admission alone was unusual and revealing. That single night pushed the war past the front and into daily life, and it raised a blunt question that spreads fast inside any country under stress. If Belgorod can be hit, is Moscow safe? The Institute for the Study of War's daily assessments have tracked Ukraine's growing reach against Russian rear zones, noting how repeated deep attacks force Russia to disperse defenses and accept higher risk at home. That pattern turns stability from a promise into a moving target. This is where the social contract meets the limits of narrative control, because images of a city going dark are stronger than any talking point. Reuters reported power and hot water failures across the region on September 29th, while videos of explosions and a burning facility flooded social media. Even if Moscow framed parts of it as technical trouble, the lived experience undercut the message. In political terms, the shock traveled faster than the repair crews, and that gap breeds doubt. Morale at the front is not just about rations and ammunition. It is also about the belief that families are out of harm's way. When a rear city loses electricity and sirens struggle to warn of new threats, soldiers naturally fear for their loved ones, which complicates retention and resilience. Analysts have long noted that rear area insecurity corrodes will more efficiently than battlefield propaganda. That effect is an analytical inference from how rear area strikes stress command, communications, and public confidence documented in independent campaign assessments, rather than a single poll or leaked memo. Internationally, the message was clear. Ukraine can reach deep into Russian territory with a mix of means, and that reach is expanding. Kyiv-based reporting noted claims that HIMARS rockets hit a thermal power facility in Belgorod on September 28th, while retired officials speaking to Ukrainian media framed the new reality bluntly: there are no guaranteed sanctuaries. The same week, open reporting highlighted Ukraine's adaptation of long-range domestic systems, including the land attack Neptune variant used against a factory in Bryansk, underscoring that Kyiv is less bound by Western usage limits as it fields home-built missiles. Together, those signals tell Moscow and NATO capitals that Ukraine's deep strike toolkit is diversifying. The Kremlin's reply has leaned on deterrent rhetoric, not only to warn Kyiv, but to pressure Western debate. Moscow raised the specter of escalation if the United States were to approve Tomahawk deliveries. a line meant to slow new long-range options and to keep Russia's interior off the target list. The statement landed the day after Belgorod's outages, which made the timing part of the message. Still, signals of risk do not erase the fact that rear area defenses can be saturated and bypassed, as recent strikes keep proving. The character of the war is shifting, because infrastructure has become the battlefield and distance is no longer protection. Reuters has chronicled repeated Ukrainian hits on energy and petrochemical sites inside Russia this month, including the Salavat complex in Bashkortostan. These actions are not random. They are designed to thin fuel stocks, raise logistical costs, and force Russia to spend air defense missiles on the wrong nights and the wrong places. In that logic, Belgorod's blackout is not an isolated event. It is a node in a campaign that makes power grids, rail choke points, and industrial plants part of the target deck. Strategically, the takeaway is simple and hard. The old front line is blurring into a national vulnerability map. When rear hubs can be blinded and supply lines can be paused by one well-timed hit, Russia must either stretch defenses thin across vast territory or accept recurring shocks at home. Both paths are costly, and both strain the very promise of order that underpins the regime's authority. That is why the night of September 28th matters beyond one city's lights. It shows how a single, coordinated blow can wobble a political system built on the illusion of safety. With that illusion shaken and logistics under pressure, the final question is whether Belgorod was a one-night warning or the start of a sustained pattern that will keep blinding sensors and freezing movement across Russia's rear. And that is where we turn next. Belgorod was not just a city caught in a blackout. It became a symbol of a new phase in this war. On the night of September 28th, Ukraine showed that it could strike deep into Russian territory, shifting from defense to an offensive designed to paralyze the rear. For ordinary Russians, this was the first time darkness and cold reached their homes, breaking the social contract that had promised safety for 2 decades. For Russia's military, the strike served as a warning that logistics, industry, and defense networks are no longer beyond reach. And for the wider world, it was a reminder that modern war leaves no true safe zone. The question now is simple. Was Belgorod only a prelude or the beginning of a campaign that Moscow cannot stop? Subscribe to Military Force so you never miss the next frontline analysis.